I want to thank everybody for being here. To show honor and respect to Mr. Jacob, I ask that you please take a moment at this time to turn off or silence your cell phones. At the beginning of the Torah, we read that God creates human beings by taking dust from the earth and breathing into that dust a nishmat chayim, a living soul. The Torah teaches us that all human beings are composed of a physical body and a living soul. But at the end of our days, our soul and our body separate once again. Our physical body returns to the dust that it was created from, and our soul, our neshama, returns to God. Today, our responsibility is twofold. We're ensuring that Armin Jacob's body is returned properly to its final resting place, and at the same time, we honor his neshama, his soul, and ensure that it reaches its appropriate spiritual home. I'll begin with a chapter of Psalms, Psalm 23. Mizmar leDavid, Adonai roi lo echsar. A psalm by David, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Bina teshayar b'tseini, amei menuchot yinaleini. In lush meadows he lays me down, beside tranquil waters he leads me. Nafshi yeshaveh v'yancheni v'maglei tzedek l'man shemo. He restores my soul, he leads me on paths of justice for his name's sake. Gam ki elech beged salmavet lo yira ra ki yatzei imadi shivtecha mishantecha hema yinachamuni. Though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you, God, are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Tzarach lefanei shochan neged tzavarai dishantav Hashem en roshi kosir rivaya. You prepare a table before me in full view of my adversaries. You have anointed my head with oil, my cup overflows. May only goodness and kindness pursue me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord for the length of my days. At this time, I'd like to call up Deborah, Mr. Jacob's granddaughter, to share some words.
For the past few years, I have visited my grandfather at Montefiore. Although my visits were not nearly as frequent as I would have liked, I could always count on Papa Armin to greet us with a warm smile and wearing a cardigan sweater, which he had in almost every color. The last few years, he wasn't able to fully communicate, and it was hard to see the shadow of the man I knew and loved. But in his eyes, I always saw the same loving, gentle, sweet man I grew up with and was lucky to call my grandfather. In earlier years, my brother David and I were fortunate to spend a great deal of time with our grandparents. We shared holidays with them, they took us to the mall and out to eat, and we hung out at their house whenever we could. They picked David and me up from camp, and they were the first call when we were sick at school. Truth be told, I wasn't always that sick, but I just wanted to hang out with them. We never went back to college without a bag of goodies that my grandmother had baked or that my grandfather had picked up for us at the store. They always made sure we were loved and cared for. Our grandparents were great people. Perhaps the fondest memory we have of our grandfather is the way he loved my grandmother. He was a true gentleman, and his devotion to her was unwavering. Even when Grandma would get riled up, Papa wouldn't get excited or argue. He would just listen and make a joke or two. He really was a mensch of a man. He always went out of his way to pick up friends and take them out to a meal or to run errands when they could no longer take themselves. And although it didn't define him, another important aspect of our grandfather's legacy is that he was a Holocaust survivor. We didn't discuss it often, but we knew about our grandparents' experiences. It was always there just beneath the surface. Life wasn't always easy for them, and the atrocities they faced at the hands of the Nazis must never be forgotten. It is up to us to share their stories now that they cannot do so for themselves. The biggest lesson in all of the precious time spent with our grandparents is that of resilience. Leaving everything they knew behind to come to a new country as young adults was anything but easy. But they did it. They worked hard, built a family, and created new and happy memories. They raised 3 kids, enjoyed 5 grandchildren, and Papa Armin even got to spend some time with all 12 of his great-grandchildren, and they adored him. He enjoyed all of his step-grandchildren and great-grandchildren as well, and happily welcomed new spouses to the family with warmth and joy. On one of the last visits my husband, my kids, and I had with my grandfather, my 2 oldest boys practiced parts of the B'nai Mitzvah service for him. It was special as my boys were preparing to take on their religious responsibilities, just as my father and grandfather had done before them. A true Lador Vador moment. I'm so thankful that we got to share that with him. For 95 years, our grandfather lived and was a blessing to everyone that knew him. We will always remember the honest, hardworking, good person that he was. He will be missed, but now we will all try to honor his memory with acts of kindness, tzedakah, and tikkun olam. We love you, Papa.
I'd like to call up Danny, Mr. Jacob's grandson, to share some words.
Some early memories of Papa are Pesach Seders at his house, sleepovers, breakfasts at Broadway Bagels, lunch at the Old Country and later Hometown Buffet, lunches at Richmond Mall and Beechwood Place, and in more recent years, that was all replaced with Issy's Pizza. Of course, I also remember a special time celebrating my bar mitzvah when they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. That was a very special time. More recent memories are Shabbos lunches, definitely a lot of bingo with Grandma and Grandpa, Simchat Torah night at shul, and more recently visiting him at Menorah Park in Montefiore, where we were fortunate enough to celebrate Avi's bris at Montefiore, and more recently last year celebrating Papa's 95th birthday. I'm very thankful that all 4 of my grandparents were in Cleveland, and I got to have a close relationship with all of them. Both of my grandmothers lived past 80, and my grandfather's well past 90, and I feel very thankful for that. Papa had the longest life of any of them, and he was also the last one alive, and interestingly, he seems to have outlived all of his friends too. I know he had many friends. I'm very thankful that he got to meet all 4 of my children, and at least my oldest son should have memories of him. I know he really enjoyed when the kids would come to visit. Even when Ariella was born in October, Papa was actually in the hospital at the time, so he was on the same floor, so the kids were able to just go right down the hall, and Papa was able to meet his newest great-granddaughter. So after my grandma died, I realized I only had one grandparent left, and I knew this day would one day come when I no longer have any grandparents left. We tried to call and visit Papa as much as we could, and he would always end every call and every visit with "Papa loves you." So I'll always remember that. And one of my last memories of him is watching wrestling on YouTube with Aaron in the Montefiore computer lab. And the thought I want to close with, when I told the kids on Saturday night the news, Aaron had some questions, and he said, when Mashiach comes, someone in school said, if you're good, you'll come back to life, but not if you're bad. And he said, Daddy, was Papa good? And I said, yes, Papa was good.
Before I continue with my own remarks, I want to share some words from Nancy, Mr. Jacob's daughter, titled Thoughts from His Daughter. Some of you here today know my father from years past. Some of you may know him more recently. Please allow me to share some thoughts. My father was a quiet man, very gentle and sensitive. I never heard him utter a bad word about anyone, and I never heard him speak falsely. He was very adaptable, as I think you will see. Even though he was not loud, he was very funny. The only problem is that the punchlines were always in Hungarian. First and foremost, he was a family man. From the time that he and my mother were married, he was always looking for ways to provide for his family. As an example, after World War II, when a paperwork error led my parents to live in Vienna, Austria for 2.5 years, while awaiting transit to the U.S. and not knowing any German, my father was able to secure an office position. Then, on arrival in the U.S. in December of 1948, he apprenticed with an uncle who had immigrated before the war. Some years later, with little formal education and no business degree, he established his own painting and decorating business. He understood the value of $1 and made sure to pay all his debts. In fact, when he came to the United States, it was not with nothing in his pockets, but actually owing someone $5. He paid that debt as soon as he could. You can't speak of my father without also speaking of my mother, because they were truly a team. They complemented each other. Where one was weak, the other was strong. They even had their own little meals on wheels, delivering food to friends in need. My father was the designated delivery man. Although my father said very little, when he spoke, it had meaning. He rarely spoke of his early days growing up in the Transylvania region of Romania. He was one of 7 brothers and sisters. His family owned a mill. Farmers would bring their sunflowers to the mill, which converted the flowers to oil. His home served as the town's synagogue, complete with an ark and Sefer Torah inside. At the age of 20 in 1942, he was forcibly conscripted into a Hungarian labor battalion. This was not a military position, but was slave labor. His unit was marched through Poland and inside Ukraine while being forced to clear and repair roads with little food, clothing, and ditches for shelter. He was held captive in Russia for 3 years during the war, where he suffered frostbite and typhus. Very few men from his unit survived. Most died from starvation or disease. When he returned to his home in the spring of 45, he learned that except for 2 brothers, all of his immediate family had been taken to Auschwitz, where they perished. He was truly a survivor. He was spry and self-reliant into his 90s, and only in the last 3 years was his health an issue. And even then, you wouldn't hear a complaint from him. He decided on his own to live in a long-term care setting where he became a very well-liked resident, particularly on his regular rides through the hallways. He even became interested in computers and loved watching YouTube videos. Things clearly won't be the same. We are lucky to have had him for 95 years, 8 months, and 2 days, and are grateful that the legacy he leaves behind is that of a good man. A good man. As you heard, Armin Jacob was born in Vischalt, which is in the Transylvania region of Romania. He was in the middle of 7 children. Of course, however, only just a handful would survive into adulthood. It's hard for us even to imagine the extreme hardships that he experienced during the war, first being in a labor battalion, basically functioning as a slave, only to then spend years in a Russian prisoner of war camp. Even after he somehow managed to survive, he discovered that nearly all of his family had been killed. And it was only at that point that he had to make the decision whether to continue to build up his life again, essentially having lost everything. He met his beloved wife Elizabeth after the war. The 2 of them married in Europe and ended up in Vienna, where their oldest son Marty was born. Armin and Elizabeth came to Cleveland because they had family here. He came with nothing, but like a lot of survivors, he let nothing get in the way of providing for his family. He went to night school, he learned English, he learned a trade, eventually painting homes all around the area, and especially in Twinsburg. You could just drive around the east side, and even after decades, he could point out all the homes that he had painted. Hard work really defined his life in the best possible way. He understood that at the end of the day, all that we can truly call our own is the result of our blood, sweat, and tears, the efforts of our hands. It was important for him that this work ethic be passed on to his children as well. This occurred through his role modeling, but also through practical hands-on experience. When Marty was 12 years old, the moment that school ended for the summer, the very next day, his dad got him up at 6 a.m. to take him out to start painting houses. I can't say it was the most fun summer of Marty's life, but it taught him the real meaning of hard work. There were other fundamental life lessons that Armin made sure to impart to his children. What it means to save and not spend beyond your means. Recognizing that when you appreciate what you have, that this is what brings one a sense of happiness and meaning. He taught them what it means to feel responsibility to others, whether it was the people you worked with on the job or your closest family members. More importantly, he taught them how to be a mensch, how to be a good person who lives life with integrity. Armin and Elizabeth were very active in Kol Israel together. The survivors here in Cleveland really became their extended family. They made multiple trips to Israel together. And it's important to emphasize that the synagogue was always a big part of his and his family's life. He was involved in Taylor Road Synagogue for over 50 years. And when the opportunity would arise for him to give back however he could to the synagogue, he would never hesitate. Even when he couldn't make it to shul, he made a point of davening at home. And even at Montefiore, he would make the effort to attend services. These past few years since Elizabeth's passing have not been easy for Mr. Jacob. The two of them were more than a team. They were life partners. They were called Besheret. They were soulmates. And in recent years, one could feel her absence even when one was with him, because it was the kind of relationship where you can't determine where one person ends and the other begins. But their love was a special one. Their relationship was a special one. And I know it serves as a model for his children, his grandchildren, and his great-grandchildren as well. It's also important that we acknowledge the incredible care that Armin's daughter Nancy gave to him these past few years. She was continuously by his side, looking out for him at Menorah Park and then Montefiore, ensuring that all of his needs were being taken care of. It also must be mentioned that Armin loved his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren. He loved spending time with them. After having lost nearly his entire family during the Holocaust, there was nothing that he appreciated more than seeing his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren when they were young. To him, young children were priceless, all of them. And I know he cherishes them all. His grandchildren, Deborah and Eric Hurwitz, their children, his great-grandchildren, Cameron, Jackson, Skylar, and Everly, his grandchildren, David and Michaela Jacob, his great-grandchildren, Benjamin and Stella, Hallie and Drew Beniger, and their children, his great-grandchildren, Austin and Olivia, Heather and Phil Winzicki, his great-grandchildren, Cade and Jace, Danny and Ruth Jacob, and their children, his great-grandchildren, Aaron, Elisheva, Avi, and Ariella, his grandchildren, Jenny and Randy Begley, their children, Dylan and Riley, and his grandson, Adam, as well. He loved all of you. And even though he was not always a man of many words, each of you knows, each of you understands in the depths of your soul just how much he loved you. And it's more than words can ever express. With the holiday of Pesach rapidly approaching, this isn't the time of year when we go too far, too deep into one sense of mourning, because Nisan and Pesach itself is a time of joy. I want to take this opportunity to highlight a specific aspect of the holiday that Armin embodied greatly in his own life. And it's an aspect that we can take inspiration in and I think find a sense of joy as well. Pesach, like many of the Jewish holidays, has many names to it. It's called Pesach, or Passover in English. It's called Zman Cheretenu, the time of our freedom. However, in Chassidus, it's referred to as Chag Emunah, the holiday of faith. And the reason for this is quite simple. The story of the Exodus from Egypt is the story of how the Jewish people found their faith in God. It's a story of suffering and redemption, a story that Armin understood intimately. Though we tell it every year at the Seder, it's not easy to truly internalize the meaning of what this story is all about. For most of us, faith is easy when life is going well. But when things get hard, faith can be extremely difficult, and God can feel quite distant. The challenge, the real challenge of faith, is to develop an ongoing relationship with God, even when life becomes hard. Now, in order to understand exactly what this means, we have to understand that the Hebrew word for faith is emunah, which has some interesting nuances that are not always emphasized in the English. Faith in Hebrew, emunah, does not mean a cognitive belief, or a belief that something is true or something is not true in the logical sense. In Hebrew, what emunah means is steady or reliable. It's something that can endure even through the most difficult of circumstances. Armin modeled emunah in all that he did. It was both the source of his strength and a sign of his inner tenacity. Armin's faith, his emunah, enabled him to embrace life even when it was hard, even when it was overwhelming, even when it would have broken most of us in the room here today. It was his faith that gave him the strength to keep going forward, to embrace God, to embrace life, to keep putting one foot in front of the other. It gave him the courage to persevere, and what emunah, I think, also did for him is always enabled him to recognize what was most important in life, right? Because when you understand the values that are at the center, that animate you, that give you strength, you recognize what's important, and you want to be able to give that over to others. They're simple and perhaps obvious, but Armin, as I said, embodied them so well in his emunah. They're family, hard work, and being a mensch. I got to see Armin's emunah firsthand when Taylor Road Synagogue merged into our shul several years ago. And what was incredible to me is the way in which Armin embraced the new possibilities of our combined shul despite the uncertainties of what may lie ahead. As far as he was concerned, our shul was his shul, and it would be the place where his relationship with God, his emunah, would continue, and he would come every Shabbos, even when his health declined. It was important for him to be there, to be present with others who he knew, and to be the place where his true, authentic faith could be expressed. Personally, I'm deeply grateful to have known him and to have had him in our shul. His genuine emunah was an inspiration to us all. As we say goodbye to Armin today, I know that his family wants to thank him for being such a terrific role model, for his strength, for his love, and for his faith. May Armin Jacob's soul forever be bound up in the bonds of eternal life. Yehi zichro baruch, and may his memory forever be a blessing. Because it is the month of Nisan, we will not recite the Kel Mali memorial prayer. Burial will continue after the funeral service at Mount Olive Cemetery. The family will be receiving people for Shiva today until 8 p.m., Wednesday and Thursday from 1 to 3 p.m. and 6 to 8 p.m., and Friday morning from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. There'll be Mincha Marav at the shul at 7:30 on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday night, and contributions can be made to Ohev Tzedek Cedar Sinai Synagogue or to Taylor Road Synagogue. I ask that people rise at this time to show one final act of kavod for Mr. Jacob, an act that he really so truly deserves, and ask the pallbearers come forward.